Welcome to part 2 of the disturbing video game Iceberg. Now, these entries do get very dark and disturbing, so if you're someone who can't handle it, then I advise you click away. In the last part, we looked at the first layer of the iceberg. As we get deeper into the iceberg, each entry becomes more obscure and disturbing. Without any more delay, let's get into it. S.T.A.L.K.E.R. S.T.A.L.K.E.R. is a series of survival horror shooters developed by GSC Game World. The first game, S.T.A.L.K.E.R. Shadow of Chernobyl, released in 2007 and takes place inside a fictional version of the Chernobyl exclusion zone in Ukraine. The world of the game draws inspiration from the real-life Chernobyl disaster in 1986, but mixes it with science fiction, paranormal anomalies, and mutated creatures. In the game's story, a second mysterious explosion at the power plant creates a dangerous region known simply as the Zone. Inside it, the laws of physics break down. Invisible anomalies can tear you apart instantly. Strange artifacts form with supernatural properties, and hostile mutants roam the ruins. People known as stalkers illegally enter the zone to hunt these artifacts, chasing fortune despite the constant risk of death. What makes S.T.A.L.K.E.R. so disturbing isn't just the monsters, it's the atmosphere. The zone feels abandoned, hostile, and deeply wrong. You spend long stretches alone in silent forests, empty villages, and decaying Soviet structures, where something always feels like it's watching you. The game rarely relies on jump scares. Instead, it builds dread through isolation, unpredictable dangers, and the unsettling sense that the environment itself is alive and completely indifferent to whether you survive. And that lingering feeling is what makes the zone so unforgettable. Cry of Fear. Cry of Fear is a psychological horror game originally started as a mod for Half-Life before being released as a standalone game in 2013. Despite being made by a small independent team, it quickly gained a reputation for being one of the most unsettling horror experiences on PC. The game follows a young man named Simon Henriksson who wakes up alone in a dark, empty city after being hit by a car. Armed with little more than a phone, flashlight and handgun, he wanders through the abandoned streets, apartments and underground tunnels while being hunted by a grotesque, distorted creature. What makes Cry of Fear so disturbing isn't just the monsters, it's the psychological themes behind them. As the story unfolds, the game explores depression, trauma, loneliness, and suicidal thoughts, with many of the enemies representing twisted manifestations of Simon's mental state. The game constantly puts players in vulnerable situations, tight corridors, limited ammunition, and enemies that move in unnatural, jerky ways. Combined with its oppressive darkness and haunting sound design, it creates an atmosphere that feels intensely personal and deeply uncomfortable. Instead of just trying to scare you, Cry of Fear forces you to sit with the character's psychological breakdown, and that's what makes it so disturbing long after you stop playing. Dark Deception. Now, for this entry I wasn't sure, as on the iceberg it just said Deception. I was looking into it, I couldn't find any games specifically named Deception, so I just went with this one here because it seems to fit the theme. Okay, so Dark Deception is a horror maze game developed by Glowstick Entertainment and first released in 2018. The game mixes arcade-style gameplay with horror elements, often described as something like Pac-Man, but twisted into a nightmare. You play as a man named Doug Hauser, who finds himself trapped in a mysterious realm controlled by a sinister woman named Bierce. She forces you to enter different nightmare worlds and collect glowing soul shards while being hunted by increasingly terrifying enemies. At first glance, the game almost feels colourful and arcade-like, but that's part of what makes it disturbing. Each level hides something darker beneath the surface. Whether it's murderous mascots, living statues, or warped hospital patients, the enemies feel exaggerated and grotesque, in a way that turns familiar settings into something deeply uncomfortable. The game also rarely lets you fight back. Most of the time you're running, trapped in a tight maze-like environments, while something relentlessly chases you. The constant pressure, combined with loud audio cues and sudden encounters, creates a sense of panic that doesn't really let up. The mix of bright visuals, psychological manipulation, and non-stop pursuit is what gives Dark Deception its unsettling edge. Misao. Misao is a horror adventure game created by Japanese developer Sen and originally released in 2011 using RPG Maker. Like many RPG Maker horror titles, it relies on less complex graphics and more on storytelling, atmosphere, and psychological tension. The story follows a high school student who suddenly finds her school transformed into a nightmare world. The chaos begins after the mysterious disappearance of a girl named Misao Satomi. Rumors spread that her vengeful spirit has returned, and the school itself begins to collapse into a twisted version of reality. To escape, the player has to uncover what really happened to Misao by exploring the ruined school and finding pieces of her body that have been scattered throughout the building. What makes Misao so disturbing isn't just the supernatural horror, it's the themes behind it. As the story unfolds, it reveals dark topics like bullying, cruelty, and the consequences of ignoring someone who is suffering. Many of the scenes are shockingly graphic for such a simple looking game, using sudden gore and disturbing imagery to leave a strong impression. Siren. Siren, also known as Forbidden Siren in some regions, is a survival horror game developed by Japan Studio and published by Sony Computer Entertainment for the PlayStation 2 in 2003. The game was directed by Kiichiro Toyama, who previously worked on the original Silent Hill. The story takes place in a remote Japanese village called Hanuda, where a mysterious siren echoes through the night and traps the town in supernatural disaster. The player controls multiple characters across different points in time, all trying to survive while uncovering the truth behind the village and the strange creatures known as Shibito. What makes Siren so disturbing is its atmosphere and realism. The Shibito aren't typical monsters. They're former villagers who continued their normal routines while being twisted into something unnatural. You might see them patrolling with flashlights, praying at shrines, or muttering to themselves while searching for you. The game also forces you to hide rather than fight. With limited weapons and slow movement, survival often means watching enemies through the game's sight-jacking mechanic, literally seeing through the eyes of the creatures hunting you. The constant feeling of being watched, combined with the eerie silence, distorted voices, and the unsettling behaviour of the Shibito, makes Siren one of the most psychologically disturbing horror games ever made. Yume Nikki. Yume Nikki is an indie exploration game created by the mysterious Japanese developer known only as Kikiyama. Released in 2004 using RPG Maker, the game quickly gained a cult following online because of its strange, dreamlike world and lack of traditional storytelling. You play as a quiet girl named Madotsuki who refuses to leave her apartment. Instead, she goes to sleep and enters a series of bizarre dream worlds that the player can freely explore. There is no combat, almost no dialogue, and very little explanation of what's actually happening. What makes Yume Nikki so disturbing is how surreal and unpredictable the dream environments are. As you wander through these strange landscapes, you'll encounter unsettling characters, distorted creatures, and imagery that feels symbolic but never fully explained. Some areas feel lonely and quiet, while others suddenly become deeply uncomfortable, featuring grotesque visuals, eerie music, and characters that behave in ways that feel completely unnatural. Because the game never tells you what anything means, players are left to interpret it themselves. Many people believe the dreams represent themes like isolation, anxiety, and psychological trauma. That ambiguity is what made Yume Nikki so unsettling. It doesn't try to scare you directly. It creates a world that feels wrong in ways you can't fully explain. Simulacra. Simulacra is a found phone horror game developed by Kagan Games and released in 2017. The entire game takes place on a smartphone that the player discovers, belonging to a missing woman named Anna Wright. Instead of exploring a traditional game world, you investigate Anna's disappearance by digging through her phone, reading text messages, watching recorded videos, checking emails, and scrolling through social media. Piece by piece, you start to uncover what happened to her before she vanished. What makes Simulacra so disturbing is how realistic it feels. The game uses live-action video clips of Hannah that slowly become more frantic and unsettling as the story progresses. Her messages grow increasingly desperate, hinting that something inside the phone itself might be influencing her. There is also a strange digital entity known as a Simulacra, something that mimics people online and spreads through phones and social media. Because the entire experience takes place inside a device we use every day, the horror feels uncomfortably close to reality. Instead of distant monsters or haunted locations, the threat exists inside something as ordinary as a smartphone. Manhunt. Manhunt is a stealth horror game developed by Rockstar North and published by Rockstar Games in 2003. The game puts players in control of a death row inmate named James Earl Cash, who is forced to participate in a series of brutal snuff films, orchestrated by a sadistic director named Lionel Starkweather. Cash is dropped into abandoned city environments and hunted by violent gangs, and the only way to survive is by stealthily executing enemies in increasingly brutal ways, using everyday objects like plastic bags, shards of glass, and baseball bats. What makes Manhunt so disturbing is not just the extreme levels of violence, it's the way the game presents it. Executions are drawn out and graphic, and the game actively rewards the player for performing more brutal kills. And the entire experience is framed like a film, with Starkweather watching and encouraging the violence through a camera. Critics and media outlets argued that its graphic content crossed a line, especially after it was briefly linked to a real-world murder case in the United Kingdom. As a result, Manhunt was banned in several countries, including New Zealand and Germany, and it was temporarily pulled from sale in the UK. Even today, Manhunt is still remembered as one of the most controversial and disturbing video games ever made. Eternal Darkness. Eternal Darkness is a psychological horror game developed by Silicon Knights and published by Nintendo for the Nintendo GameCube in 2002. Unlike most horror games that focus on a single character, the story spans centuries and allows multiple people across different time periods who become connected by an ancient, terrifying force. The main storyline centers around a woman named Alex Rovas, who investigates the mysterious death of her grandfather in a secluded mansion. As she uncovers the truth, she discovers an ancient book called the Tome of Eternal Darkness, which reveals a hidden history of dark gods and forbidden knowledge. What makes Eternal Darkness so disturbing is its famous sanity system. As its characters encounter monsters or supernatural events, their sanity slowly drains. When it gets low, the game begins to mess with the player in unexpected ways. You might see fake error messages, hear voices that aren't there, watch walls start bleeding, or even think your TV volume suddenly dropped to 0. Sometimes the game even pretends to delete your save file. By directly manipulating what the player sees and hears, Eternal Darkness breaks the fourth wall and makes you question what's real inside the game. Sanitarium. Sanitarium is a psychological horror adventure game developed by Dreamforge Entertainment and released in 1998. The game follows a man named Max Lafton who wakes up in an asylum after a car accident with no memory of who he is or how he got there. As Max tries to piece together his identity, he travels through a series of bizarre and surreal environments that seem to represent fragments of his past. Each chapter places him in strange locations, like a town filled with deformed children, a village obsessed with ancient rituals, or a twisted carnival-like world. What makes Sanitarium so disturbing is how heavily it leans into psychological horror rather than traditional scares. The environments feel dreamlike and symbolic, often reflecting trauma, grief, and guilt buried in Max's memories. Many of the characters you encounter are unsettling in subtle ways, whether it's their distorted appearance, cryptic dialogue, or the uncomfortable themes surrounding illness, death, and loss. Instead of relying on monsters or jump scares, the game creates a constant feeling that something is deeply wrong with the world you're exploring. And as Max's memories slowly return, the truth behind the story becomes even more unsettling than the strange places he travels through. Postal. Postal is a top-down shooter released in 1997 by Running with Scissors. Unlike most games at the time, Postal didn't focus on heroism or saving the world. Instead, it put players in control of an unarmed man, often referred to as Postal Dude, who goes on a violent rampage through a suburban town. There's very little traditional story. The game presents itself through disturbing diary entries that suggest the protagonist is mentally unstable, paranoid, and detached from reality. Civilians aren't enemies, they're just people going about their lives, and the player is the threat. What makes Postal so disturbing to me is the tone of the game. It's bleak, nihilistic, and intentionally uncomfortable. There's no justification for what you're doing, no moral framing, just escalating chaos presented in cold manner. The visuals are dark and gritty, the soundtrack is ominous, and the game constantly reinforces the idea that you're playing as someone completely unhinged. Because of this, Postal sparked heavy controversy. It was banned or restricted in several countries, including Germany and New Zealand, similar to Manhunt. It was also widely criticised for its glorification of senseless violence. Postal isn't disturbing because it tries to scare you. It's disturbing because of what you can do. The Suffering. The Suffering is a psychological horror action game developed by Surreal Software and released in 2004 by Midway Games to the PlayStation 2, Xbox and PC. The game follows a prisoner named Torque, who has been sentenced to death and sent to a prison located on a remote island. Shortly after he arrives, the prison is overrun by terrifying creatures, and the entire island descends into chaos. As Torque tries to survive and escape, he begins experiencing disturbing visions that hint at a violent past he can't fully remember. What makes The Suffering so unsettling is the way it blends supernatural horror with themes of guilt, punishment, and morality. Many of the monsters in the game are designed around different methods of execution, twisted figures with blades, restraints, or machinery built into their bodies. These creatures symbolize the brutal history of the prison and the suffering of people who died there. Throughout the game, the player also makes moral choices that affects Torque's personality and the ending of the story. Depending on how you play, Torque may be portrayed as either a victim or a truly monstrous person. That uncertainty about who Torque really is and what he may have done is what gives The Suffering its disturbing psychological edge. Well, thanks a million everyone for watching. This video was an absolute pain in the ass to edit, so I really hope you guys notice and appreciate the new editing style. Yeah, so part 3 will be out soon enough, hopefully. Some stage this week anyways. I just want to say again, thank you all for watching. It really does mean a lot. I'm very small at the minute, but hopefully I'll keep growing. And that's all I have to say really. It's part 2, the disturbing video game Iceberg. If you guys have any recommendations or tips or anything for me, much appreciated. Thank you so much everyone. Have a great day. Goodbye.